Albert Einstein, Chapter 7, Zurich, Prague, Berlin. Perhaps people weren't very much interested because they had a hard time understanding what the formula meant. Once when he was lecturing in a hall in Bern, Albert began the lecture by saying, "I'm sure you will all find the theory very simple." Such a roar of laughter greeted this remark that Albert could not continue for at least 5 minutes. Almost no one believed in his theory, but Albert's confidence in it was in no way weakened. "If my theory is successful," he said, "the Germans will claim I am a German, and the Swiss will say I am a Swiss. But if it was to fail, the Swiss would say I was a German, and the Germans would say I was a Jew." Meanwhile, things were happening among his family and friends that would affect his life in many ways. In the first place, Maleva and he began to drift apart. She had given him great companionship in the days of their extreme poverty and loneliness. Now that the name Einstein was being discussed widely wherever physicists met, she began to remind him of the career that she had given up for him. I tried never to quarrel in front of the two boys, but there was no longer any harmony between them. Jacob Einstein died, and his brother, Albert's father, grew weaker and more feeble each day. Mrs. Einstein wrote Albert that she herself was too old to continue to nurse him and cook for him, so they had persuaded cousin Elsa, Albert's childhood companion, to come and live with them. The arrangement, she wrote, had already proved a happy one. She hoped that Albert would come to Milan soon to see his father before it was too late. Marcel Grossman had given up all ideas of becoming either a teacher or a scientist and had gone into his father's business. Friedrich Adler's ability as a teacher had been recognized as a result of his work at Winterthur, and he was teaching at the University of Zurich as assistant professor. There was a chance of his soon becoming a full professor. He went to the directors and told them that while he was tremendously flattered, he thought they were making a mistake. With a man of Einstein's ability available, it would be wrong for them to select him. The board explained to Friedrich that their rules demanded that before becoming a professor, one had to become an assistant. The latter position was offered to Albert, and he accepted it gladly. Feeling that his achievements had become recognized, he gave up his job at the patent office and took his family back to Zurich to live. But now, when at last things seemed very promising, he began having trouble at home. Maleva had been gallant and brave while the going was rough. Now that Albert was hailed as a success, she talked more and more of having given up her career to serve him and bring up his children. Assistant professors were dependent for their salaries on the number of students in their classes. The Einstein theory was too difficult for most young men. Many were frightened away and sought easier credits in other classes. This did not help the Einstein's family living conditions. Actually, Albert was making less money than he had as a clerk in a patent office. Just when Albert was beginning to get discouraged, his theory began to receive more favorable attention. He was offered a full professorship at the University of Prague in Czechoslovakia. Before he was allowed to teach, Albert had to be sworn in, and for this occasion he was required to buy a fancy uniform consisting of a long coat, black trousers with a red stripe down the side, a three-cornered hat, and a sword. At the university, Albert lectured about Isaac Newton to his classes. Gradually, he became convinced that Newton's laws needed modification, particularly when they dealt with objects moving at speeds comparable to the speed of light. Some of his essays on this subject attracted a great deal of attention. Less than a year later, he was asked to come back to Zurich and serve as a full professor at his old university, the Swiss Federal Polytechnic Institute. For a young man in his very early 30s, this was a very great honor. He could hardly wait to write his parents. He received a letter from his mother almost at once. She wrote to say that his father had just died, but that there had been time for her to read him the great news in Albert's letter. She wrote that their pride in him would help sustain her in her loneliness. Cousin Elsa was returning to Berlin, but Major and Kyle would continue to look after her. On the last day of his stay in Prague, Albert's son Haynes came to him with a question. "Father, what is going to become of your beautiful uniform that you worn only once?" he asked. "Perhaps we can sell it," his father answered. "Before you do, will you wear it just once more, just once to please Edgar and me?" "Why?" "Because everybody talks about your clothes. We like to show them what you look like when you are dressed up." Albert looked down at his son's earnest, upturned face and grinned. "All right, Heinz," he said. "What have I to lose? We're leaving town soon anyway. The worst that can happen is that people will mistake me for Brazilian Amiro." So on their last day in Prague, Albert walked up and down the streets of the ancient city, with a little boy on either side of them, and a great sword clanking at his belt, almost tripping him. On his return to Zurich, Albert found himself flooded with invitations to lecture both on his theory of relativity and on his newer field theory of gravity. Encouraged by those offers, he went more and more into the field of research physics. He felt now that this rather than teaching was the field he was best suited for. He did not like to have to limit classwork to the lectures prescribed by the university prospectus. He liked to discuss with his students all the wonderful possibilities for learning that he saw in the study of the universe. It was at this time that he developed the theory that space is curved. This was a sort of theory that Albert loved to work on. The teaching seemed in many ways to be a waste of time. He was delighted, therefore, when he was visited in Zurich by a distinguished Austrian scientist whom he had met several years before. Max Planck came to Albert with the offer of not one, but three positions in Berlin. One was a full professorship at the Academy of Sciences. This was the oldest and most outstanding of all scientific institutions. Full membership in it was limited to 70. Its purpose was not teaching but research. The second offer was to give a series of lectures on whatever subjects he chose, as often or as seldom as he chose, and to spend much of his time on research. The third offer was from Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. Here, research was followed in several fields, but there was no separate institute for physics. Planck proposed that Albert should become director of the Physics Institute as soon as it was organized. Till then, he would act as consultant in other institutes of research. Any one of these positions would have been flattering to a much older and more experienced physicist. Albert wanted very much to embrace Planck and thank him heartily for the offer, but he had to ask time to think it over. He remembered all too well the military discipline that had existed in Germany. He knew he would never be able to do his best work if those conditions still existed. He pointed out to Professor Planck that he was now a citizen not of Germany but of Switzerland. If he could keep his Swiss citizenship, he would jump at the chance to accept all three positions. Now, excuse me. Now, it was Planck's turn to need time to think. He knew that Germany guarded its supremacy, jealousy, even in science. None of the board of directors would like Einstein's demands. He would have to notify them. In the meantime, Albert hurried home to discuss the situation with Maleva. She vetoed the whole idea. As a Bavarian, she hated Germany and Germans. "They're barbarians," she exclaimed. "They think only of fighting and killing and conquering. Albert, do you want your sons to be drafted with the German army?" "I certainly do not," he exclaimed, all his pacifist interest aroused. "But surely there's time for that later. They wouldn't be drafted when they're but children." "Oh, wouldn't they? You read that children are committed to 4 years compulsory army service when they are 18. The truth is they'll sign up from the age of 4 up. Then they will stay here with you, Albert said. Let us face things honestly, Albert. We have not been happy these last 3 years. If you will leave the children with me, I will give you a divorce. Then you can accept this great opportunity without endangering the lives of our sons. I think you are right, Mileva, Albert answered. Though I never would have suggested it, of course, he added. They haven't yet decided whether I may retain my Swiss citizenship, and unless they do, I shall not go.